Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live in the studio inside the Beltway this week. 8 days to go to the election. It's a day on the program of pundits and polls. Let me begin with four headlines first. Chicago Jewish man shot in the shoulder by a man shouting Allah Akbar. He was shot at least twice in the shoulder. He's not dead. No word yet on the identity of the attacker because, of course, it's a politically sensitive story, so we won't learn anything for days. Meanwhile, over the weekend, the Israeli Defense Forces struck across Iran in a remarkable display of prowess by the Israeli Air Force. The gap, according to the Wall Street Journal, exposes a big gulf in the abilities of the countries to strike each other directly. There's ceasefire talks underway in a shocked New Hampshire poll from New Hampshire Insider that shows Trump and Harris tied in the Granite State. With that background, I turn first to Charles C.W. Cooke. Charles is one of the writers over at National Review. He's the host of his own podcast called the Charles C.W. Cooke Podcast and often a contributor to the editors. Good morning, Charles. Good Monday to you. Thank you for getting up early.
No, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You know, your last podcast was quite unusual. I'm glad that Jack Butler thinks he can stay alive. But generally speaking, since we haven't talked about it, everyone knows what the editors is. What do you try and do on Charles C.W. Cooke, the podcast?
It's quite eclectic. The last one you referred to, we sat and discussed what we would do if we were the last man on Earth, how we would survive. But usually I have a guest on, and I just ask open questions, whether it's about Winston Churchill's life, or federalism, or how a prosecutor's day goes. Unlike the editors, which is more of a political panel show, I just thought it was a good opportunity to have an hour where I can ask people who know a lot more about a topic than I do questions and sort of push them a little bit. So it's
fabulously
eclectic,
entertaining.
It's a nice break. Thank you.
It's fabulously entertaining. And Jack Butler is an old friend of ours. He was an intern on the show years before he finished college. So we're glad to see him in such august company. Charles, what I want to do today is imagine that we're talking to an undecided voter. And my preferences don't matter. Your preferences don't matter. I'd just like to get your views on what they should consider about both Trump and Harris in light of a few stories. Let's start with this first one, which is radically undercovered. 39-year-old Jewish man shot critically injured in broad daylight on a Saturday morning walking to Shoal in Chicago by a man shouting Allah Akbar. Does that play into anyone's votes, do you think?
Well, I think the extent to which the president relates to that is limited, but it is true that the Democratic Party in the last decade or so has soured on Israel and has prioritized over support for Israel this bizarre philosophy that it's picked up of intersectionality and critical race theory and so on, and just doesn't seem interested in protecting Jews. The movement from which Kamala Harris comes is no better. So yeah, I think to some extent it does. There's a very weird attempt, I would say, to an undecided voter to make it seem as if the rise in anti-Semitism in America is in some way related to Trump, and that is crazy. This has come from the left.
And if you are an undecided Jewish American or an undecided supporter of Israel, is there a clear choice here?
I think Trump's better on Israel, yeah. I think you could also note that the Democrats declined to choose Josh Shapiro as the VP candidate, probably in part because they didn't want blowback from their party because Shapiro is Jewish. From my perspective, I know my preferences don't matter, but analytically, if I were a Jewish voter, I would be more comfortable with Trump.
I got to tell you, I fully expect Governor Shapiro to be their nominee in 4 years if he can fight off the crazy left wing. Let me move on to a couple other issues now. We don't just elect the president, we elect 3,000 to 5,000 people, depending on the number of appointees he or she gets done. Who would be better for the Constitution, Trump's 3,000 to 5,000 appointees or Harris's 3,000 to 5,000 appointees?
Well, I think that's an open question in that those have to get past the Senate. So, I mean, if you have a sensible...
Most of them don't. Republican... Only about 300. Only about 300 need advice and consent. 2,700 don't.
The key ones do. You know, I think that's an open question. I think that the direction that Trump would take the executive branch would be more to my liking. But I do worry, Hugh, that there are some people around him who don't have the love for the Constitution that you and I do. And that is, of course, true of her as well. One of the big problems with her as opposed to him is that when he does things that are unconstitutional, or he says things that are unconstitutional, he quite rightly gets a whole bunch of blowback immediately. Whereas Harris, and we've seen this under Biden for 4 years, is praised for it in the press, in academia, and so forth. So, I mean, if the question is who's going to get more strife for doing things that they shouldn't, it's Trump. If the question is which political appointees would move the country rightwards, Trump. But I do worry about some of the people around him too, I must say.
Oh my gosh, yes. If he brings back Peter Navarro, who I've known for 30
Right.
years, I will have heartburn from day one. He is a menace to good governance. How about judges? Who would be the better picker of judges? I don't know that we'll have a vacancy on the Supreme Court. If Trump wins, I suspect Justice Thomas will retire and maybe Justice Alito. But just generally speaking, unexpected vacancies as well as the normal sort of turnover that we see on the circuits.
I mean, for me, that is one of the most compelling arguments in favor of Trump, is that if you look at what he did in his first term, he appointed a whole bunch of excellent originalist, constitutionalist, faithful judges who are of an extremely high quality. And Harris, in her role as vice president, endorsed and supported and made the case for a candidate who doesn't fit that bill and would do it over and over and over again. I mean, as a senator, Harris was a disaster on this as well. So, I mean, to me, that's Trump without question.
Yeah, I think her judges would be an absolute nightmare for people
Yeah.
who believe in the Constitution. My next two questions presume, Charles, that China is actually our most deadly adversary, that we're in Cold War 2.0, and that Xi Jinping is a menace and a very menacing man. So, number one, who's better for dealing with Xi Jinping, Trump or Kamala?
Uh, I think Trump has better instincts in that he's more jealous of American power and prestige. I worry a little bit that he is flattered too easily. If foreign leaders say nice things about him, he tends to enjoy that. But I mean, I think if you look at his last term, there's a wildness to him that probably helps in foreign policy that she doesn't have.
The Nixon madman theory. I agree.
Yeah.
Now, when he was my guest last week, and I asked him about Jimmy Lai and if he would try and get Jimmy Lai out. That matters to me. Ought it to matter to Americans generally about dissidents who are not our own foreign nationals but are foreign nationals?
Sure. It ought to matter slightly less. I mean, I think it's incredible that we don't prioritize our citizens as we used to. I mean, you're seeing this at the moment with Gaza and Hamas. I can't believe that's not every single day on the news. uh, but yes, of course it should. I mean, the United States, when it was founded, made a universal declaration. That doesn't mean we have to go around the world enforcing it at the point of a bayonet, but it didn't say all Americans are created equal. It said all men are created equal. And those claims, which were then codified in the Constitution, don't just apply to people within our borders. So, yeah, of course we should side with them as we did during the Reagan era.
Now, you are a Brit turned American. You're an American citizen now. The UK is going after Elon Musk, and the European Union is going after Apple and Google. Who would be better for protecting American businesses from the predations of our, quote, allies? And they are our allies, but sometimes they drive me crazy, such as the UK going after Musk and the EU going after Apple.
I think Trump would, although he has a tendency to at least say that he's going to take revenge domestically on people who disagree with him or cross him. But if the question is who would be better at preventing the sort of regulatory and censorship creep that we have seen, then the answer is going to be Trump. Partly because the party to which Trump belongs, and I assume many of the people around him, just don't believe in this sort of world government approach to nonsense concepts like misinformation.
I agree. Stand by, Charles. We're going to go to break. We're going to come back. I'm going to talk with Charles during the break, and he'll be back on the other side because this is the guide for the undecided voter with Charles C.W. Cooke. He's got his own podcast, which I recommend you like and subscribe. I'm back now with Charles C.W. Cooke in our guide for the undecided voter. Charles, this is a big question. Take your time. Who would be better, Trump or Harris, for bringing stability and peace to the Middle East?
I think if you look at the two records, it's got to be Trump. I mean, the Biden years have been marked by an increase in violence and aggression in the world, and I think that that is the product of a couple of things. One is provocative weakness, in part caused by the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the way it was done. And the other caused by an almost pathological desire on the part of the institutional Democratic Party to placate Iran. The parties, although you have to separate this out for the candidates, of course, but the parties in general, I think, have two different worldviews. And I think Republicans, although I have many problems with them on Ukraine, I do think Republicans still are of the view that there is such a thing in the world as good and such a thing as evil, and that human nature is immutable over time. I'm not sure everyone in the party thinks like that explicitly, but I think that's a fundamental presumption. And I don't think that, at least at the elite level, the Democrats do. And I think that's why since, 2015 earlier, the Obama administration and then the Biden administration and now Harris are obsessed with placating Iran, and they think the issues in the Middle East stem from historical grievances, and they filter it through their obsession with race and religion and so on. And I just think that's wrong. I think that the Middle East.
I agree with you, but now I'm a Ukraine hawk. I'd give them everything that isn't nailed down. I'd give them everything that they wanted that we could afford to give them. But the Republicans are split, and the Democrats apparently aren't, although what they give late, and they restrict its use. So this is a difficult question. Which presidential candidate is better for Ukraine?
So I think Biden has largely got it right on Ukraine, and if Harris followed that path, she would be. But I will say that although I don't like Trump's rhetoric on Ukraine at all, and I think some of it is shameful, same with J.D. Vance, and although I have a problem with the Republicans in Congress on Ukraine often, Trump is a lot less opposed to helping Ukraine than people think. I mean, he gave them heavy weaponry in his first term that Obama wouldn't. And he seems to have helped shepherd through some of that money by supporting Mike Johnson's stand last year or earlier this year. So I think that's probably a tie. I think Trump's perhaps less.
On Thursday's conversation with him, I said, look, can we have Cotton, Pompeo, or Mike Waltz's SecDef? And he said, I've got a list of 4 or 5. They're all great. 2 of your guys are on my list. Do you trust him on Secretary of Defense, which is, my view, the most important cabinet appointment?
Yes, and I hope I'm not disappointed.
You say that with some hesitance. What could go wrong with Trump on defense?
What could go wrong is he could think that by looking to what he would see as establishment figures, that would get burned as he thinks he did last time. I mean, he thinks that last time he was in office that he surrounded himself with snakes, and he thinks the reason for that was that they were from the establishment, the swamp as he calls it. I mean, the people you just mentioned would be totally acceptable to me, but I'm not a Trump-style conservative. So I would be absolutely happy with this choice if you were in charge of it. I just worry that he's going to be told, look, you've got to pick people who are off the beaten path, because otherwise they'll do things you don't like, and then he'll pick someone we won't like.
It is a wild card. Stand by, Charles. We're coming right back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Charles C.W. Cooke, one of the editors at National Review. He is often a guest on the Editor's Podcast, which is a must-listen to me. He also has his own podcast, the Charles C.W. Cooke Podcast, which, like Getting Hammered, does a little bit serious and a lot that's fun. And so I recommend you follow and like and subscribe to both. All right, this is an easy pop-up fly, Charles. Are you a Yankees fan, by the way? Did I pick that up this week?
I am. I did live in New York when I first moved to America, and my wife's a big Yankees fan, so it was an easy choice.
I am a big Guardians fan, so I hate you this week, but we'll leave that aside.
All right.
This is a pop-up, or let's bet this is the odds you'll get this right are the odds of Aaron Judge striking out in the playoffs. Who would be better for the production of American energy of all sorts, including oil and small modular nuclear reactors?
Yeah, I mean that's not even up for debate. Donald Trump is the candidate for the production of American energy. Harris is not only opposed to maximizing energy production, but she's extremely dishonest about it. She said she wanted to ban fracking, then an aide said she didn't. Now that aides seem to be waffling on it, that's Trump.
Yeah. Okay, how about Kamala Harris has promised 3 million American homes. I used to be a land use lawyer, Charles. I've retired, so I've represented big developers of homes for years. So I have a very decided views on this. But if you were really wanting 3 million new American houses built, who would be better as president?
Well, I think Trump would, although the way that the president is involved in this is more limited. This is generally more of a state issue. The reason I say that, if you give me just a second to explain, is that in order to get mass home building done, you need to stand up to some of the interest groups that are making it difficult. And those include environmentalists, primarily environmentalists, and then to some extent unions. And you've also got a lot of communities at the state level. It's not really a federal concern, but at the state level that don't want more building. Well, I'm pleased that Harris has felt the need to say we're going to build a bunch more homes. I think it is a good thing that she understands that the politics there are in her favor. I just don't believe that she has any interest whatsoever in taking on some of the key blocks of her coalition, which are environmentalists, unions, and wealthy people in nice parts of the country that don't want any homes built near them. So I would say Trump.
Well, you understand this well for not being a land use lawyer. The one thing Trump can do, the 3 federal agencies, Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the EPA that get in the way of homes, he can deal. But it's mostly a state issue and a local issue, and there's not much he can do with that. And you're right about the
Right.
Center for Biological Diversity, the Sierra Club. She won't go against them. I laugh every time she says she's going to get 3 million houses built, unless she means like Cabrini Green 2.0. Moving on. Global growth is a big deal. The planet's got to grow its economy to take care of the impoverished. Who would be better for that, Charles?
Well, that's a very complicated one because it depends on whether Trump does what he says he's going to do or whether he doesn't. If Trump has a second term that looks like his first term, he will be. The United States is exploding economically. That doesn't mean the economy is good for everyone, but if you look over the last 30 years, we have, as The Economist put it recently, left the rest of the world in the dust. One of the reasons for that is we've cut taxes and regulations relative to the rest of the world, especially Europe. Trump would be better at that. But he's also talking and seems to be serious about it, about imposing mass tariffs. He said 10, 15, 20%, whatever it takes. He now says tariffs is the best word in the English language. Tariff is a better word than love, I think he said at his rally the other day. I mean, if you put 20% tariffs on the American economy, that is not going to be good for growth. It's not going to be good for global growth. It will make America less competitive. So assuming he can't get that done, I would say Trump. If he does get that done, then it's going to be her.
Now, this is going to take us into the break in our last segment, Charles. I asked Rich Lowry this because Hamilton was in favor of tariffs. Abraham Lincoln was in favor of tariffs. Ronald Reagan hated them. I hate them unless they're used to advance American national security. When did the change come? Why did we change? We have 1 minute to break.
Well, I think the change came when the American economy became developed and when, after World War II, the United States stood at about 50% of GDP and could compete. When you can compete with the rest of the world, when you're not developing anymore as an economy, I would put America up against any nation in the world. I just think we're more ingenious, we're more innovative, we're more hardworking.
This is my final segment of my voter's guide for the final 8 days with Charles C.W. Cooke. Charles, this is a gimme. For unborn children, Trump would be better. But how about for the life of a child? Who would be better?
How do you mean life of a child?
Who would allow for an environment in which children would flourish more in the United States over the next 4 years and then beyond as a result of the policies of the next 4 years? School
Yeah, I mean,
choice, health, that sort of thing.
I think that would be Trump. But I should say, you said at the beginning, independently of our preferences, that is a preference of mine because I am a conservative, and I think conservative policies like school choice, a growing economy, curricula in schools that aren't filled with ideological nonsense and thereby give people a correct conception of the country they live in. I think these things are all very important, and I think Trump is better on them.
All right, very last question. I'm a Catholic. I think you are as
Yeah.
well, though I can speak Protestant. I go to the Presbyterian Church with my wife, and I go to my Mass on Saturday or early Sunday morning. What matters most will be the identity of the next pope and whoever the conclave comes up with. But American presidents do have some impact on the vitality of religious life and the faith life. Would either of these candidates materially advance the status and standing of the Catholic Church in the United States?
So I'm not Catholic. I'm not actually religious. My wife is Catholic. My children are being raised
That's
Catholic.
what I heard. That's right. Your wife is
Yeah.
Catholic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a simple one. There's one party in this country that respects religious liberty, and there's one that does not. I'm not convinced it's particularly personally important to Trump, but while he was president, he was much better on this than Harris is. In fact, Harris is especially bad when it comes to religious liberty. She said the other day that she would allow no exemptions whatsoever when it came to abortion, by which she means she wants to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions. And I just think that's revolting. So I think Trump's better on this.
All right, so this leads me to the last question. We've done our voter's guide. People can stop listening now. You don't like Trump, you're not going to vote for Trump. I know a lot of people
Correct.
like you. Given that we've just gone through all these issues, I think Trump won all of them. Why won't you vote for Trump?
I won't vote for Trump because I think that what he did and said after the last election was disqualifying. As you've noted, I think on policy he's much better. He's not my sort of Republican, but he's better than the alternative, and I would happily vote for him. I don't expect perfection. But after he lost the last election, he tried to rewrite the law, 12th Amendment, the Electoral Count Act, and have himself declared the winner. And I just don't think that's a legitimate position to take in a democratic republic. So I thought about it long and hard, but I'm not voting for him.
But would you prefer he win over Harris, but without participating? Or are you hoping that Harris wins because he is, quote, he's not constitutionally disqualified because he wasn't impeached? And I agree with McConnell's decision not to proceed. So are you hoping that you wake up on the 6th and Trump is president-elect, or are you hoping that Harris is president-elect on November the 6th?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I thought about that a lot, and I concluded if I did, actively want him to win, then I would vote for him. I certainly don't want her to win either, and I think she's disqualified herself too. I mean, she's said she would be happy packing the court. She wants to get rid of the filibuster. She has no respect for religious liberty. The list goes on. My view, Hugh, is the reason I didn't vote for either of them is what I want is a Republican Senate to block whatever the president tries to do over the next 4 years, if it is dangerous to the Constitution. I think we're going to get that. So what I'm hoping is I wake up and there's a Republican Senate, and I will breathe a sigh of relief if there is.
You and I are on the same page with one exception. I'm going to use my vote on the fear that Virginia might be the key to the Electoral College. And yours live in Florida. You have a luxury. Florida's going to go for Trump. But Virginia might actually go for either of them. So I've got to take it very seriously. Charles C.W. Cooke. Follow him at X at Charles C.W. Cooke. Listen to Charles C.W. Cooke podcast, and, of course, the editor. Charles, thank you. That was comprehensive. It'll be a great voting guide for anyone who wants to listen to it, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on.